I'm talking to Professor of Philosophy Kurt Blankschaen
Yeah. Hmm.
from Daemen College. We're going to talk about his recent paper along with Travis Timmerman called Acting Out, Straight Performers Permissibly Portraying Queer Characters, and it's
Hmm.
forthcoming in the Journal of Moral Philosophy.
Hmm.
Kurt, thanks for coming on the show.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to chat with you.
So I'm curious, before we get started talking about your paper, about your background.
Hmm.
You're an academic and you're a philosopher.
Yeah.
So, can you explain why you became an academic and why philosophy?
Um, well, I originally started out in college. I wanted to work for the State Department, actually. And then I took an honors philosophy course when I was at University of Dayton, and it was interdisciplinary. So it combined religious studies and history, and it was sort of like world history, but you would pause at like the Enlightenment or like Plato and Aristotle, and you would sort of do those as well with history and how to iterate or interact with religion. And I really loved that. So I took a bunch more philosophy courses. And then when I graduated, I thought to sit for the foreign officer exam or to go to grad school in philosophy. And I thought, I really loved philosophy. So I thought, well, if I don't do that, I'll probably regret it in like 10 or 15 years. So why don't I just try it now and I'll see how it goes. So I went out to Arizona State to work with Cheshire, Calhoun. And it turned out that contemporary analytic philosophy was nothing like the historical kind of stuff I had learned. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but I did a master's out at ASU, and then I really got into sort of contemporary ethical issues, especially around LGBTQ philosophy. So looking, eventually I went to University of Kansas, and then I transferred with my advisor to Boston University. So I started looking at sort of the social metaphysics of identities, and then I also got involved with medical ethics.
So, my internet was stupid. I turned off my video because the internet was
Sure.
being stupid. I apologize for that.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it's like one of those. Anyway, could you go back again and talk? You were about at Boston University, and that's when you got cut off. I apologize for
Oh.
that.
No, not at all. So I went to Boston University and I started working on some of the social metaphysics behind identities. So race and gender and class. And then when I was also at Boston, I ended up getting interested in medical ethics. So specifically looking at how do some of the uh, metaphysics behind social identities change when you put them in like a public health context versus when you're talking about them in sort of ordinary language, and why do we sort of have those differences? And I ultimately ended up we're going more into medical ethics while still kind of drawing in on those the metaphysics of social identities. Um, but when I was at ASU, that was when I met Travis, and so we kind of maintained a really strong friendship over the years, and we eventually ended up collaborating on this project, which was a lot of fun, and especially because we sort of approached philosophy in very different ways, and we work in very different areas. It was really rewarding to kind of actually kind of work hand in hand with each other.
I wanted to walk people through this paper because I'm
Hmm.
I'm probably closer to Travis insofar as I'm a moral philosopher.
Yeah.
Um, but so you might think. So reminder, the paper is called Acting Out Straight Performers Permissibly Portraying Queer Characters.
Hmm.
Um, One might find this an odd project. I'm a big movie buff and I love
Yeah.
actors who have range. So
Hmm.
why can't we just say like, why does it matter? In other words, like,
Hmm.
why pursue the project at all? Why even inquire into the permissibility or not of this sort of thing?
Yeah. No, I think it's a super great question. And one of the things that kind of got us involved in it was a little while ago, Netflix released the series Heartstopper. So it's based on the graphic novel. And Kit Connor was one of the main leads in it, and so he plays a bisexual teenager. So it's his coming of age romantic comedy. And then shortly thereafter, Connor was cast in another movie where he was playing an ostensibly straight character. It was a sort of a boy-girl romance, and fans demanded to know if he was bisexual in real life or just like playing one on TV. And first, it might just seem something like, why don't we just ignore them? But they badgered and badgered and badgered until eventually he came out in this kind of very angry social media post, and rightfully so, I think, where he said, congratulations, you forced me to come out. You forced an 18-year-old to come out and buy. Um, you kind of missed the point of the show. And it wasn't just Connor. We start to see a lot of these other same kinds of requests or questions come up, especially in media interviews where actors are sort of not confronted, that's way too strong a word, but are asked about some of their maybe past projects. So Tom Hanks famously says, like, well, I really valued Philadelphia when he played a gay character who was also HIV positive, but he said, I probably wouldn't be appropriate to do that now. And so there's a pretty strong online presence and conversation about this in media. And Travis and I were really interested in investigating this and kind of figuring it out. And surprisingly, there really weren't too many philosophers working on it. There was some on sort of like, can non-marginalized authors imagine marginalized experiences in fiction and things like that, or what are the ethics of representation? But almost nobody, as far as we could find, really wrote on this particular question. So we wanted to really figure out what was going on, why were people getting so worked up about it, and then what was necessarily sort of morally important about those kinds of representations.
Right. And so to people who are listening, what it sounded like you just said to answer my question was,
Yeah.
we should be pursuing this as philosophers because people online can be bullies, which is true. They can be.
Mhm.
But I guess what I'm asking is, okay, that's people want to know things, but people want to know all sorts of things. I'm still not sure why that's relevant to permissibility. So the reason I'm asking is when I was reading your
Mhm.
paper, it seemed like what was doing a lot of work was displacement.
Mhm.
If Jerry takes a part and he's straight, but it's a gay part,
Mhm. Mhm.
he's thereby displacing a gay actor, either
Yeah.
as a gay character with like lived experience behind him,
Mhm.
or just
Sure.
as a job, like it's a
Mhm.
paying. Um, so that's sort of more what I was getting at. Um,
Gotcha.
right? So there's part of it's like social pressure to like think about it more.
Mhm.
But on the permissible, like if you're talking to someone online and they're trying to pressure you, and you're like, okay, how do I put my philosopher cap on? What do you say initially? What's the first? So why
Mhm.
not just say, all I care about is how good of an actor they are, full stop. Why is that wrong?
Yeah. No, no, no.
Or
I mean, so
misguided or
yeah.
whatever.
No, so I think I get a better sense of it. So we do try to take up that exact concern is so it's not just sort of addressing the online outrage, as it were, but we do take up that concern about are straight actors taking roles away from other characters. And part of that we think isn't necessarily going to follow because it's going to sort of be force, I think, actors or performers into the trilemma that we develop in section two. So one concern would be if only gay characters could play, or only gay performers could play gay characters. In effect, you're kind of creating an outing condition, because then any performer who wants to take on that role already has to be out, and that seems to kind of force them into a decision that maybe they're not quite ready for. And there is the concern about online backlash, not just insofar as like you'll get nasty tweets or emails or things like that, but some performers did talk about how they received death threats or hate mail. And it also then raises questions of future employability if future studios or directors would see them as a riskier bet, insofar as, well, look, people protested this person. I'd rather just avoid the controversy and hire this other person. So we want to try and address that kind of moral concern, one, because we think it's wrong to badger um, performers online about this question, but two, it also seems to set an unfortunate precedent for the industry going forward.
Could you say more about your trilemma? So you mentioned the first one, which is if you have to be gay to play a gay part, or bi to play a bi part, or trans to play a
Hmm.
trans part, etc. That this, by at least by implication, outs people against their will.
Hmm.
Why can't someone come back and say, yeah, that's fair, but there are social rights and social wrongs, like there's a social value to this
Hmm.
that over, like maybe an aggregate will outweigh whatever
Hmm.
concerns we have about people being badgered or, I mean, the
Hmm.
outing thing is not fun,
Yeah.
admittedly, and there's some things about it that are morally dubious at best. But that's often the trade-offs we sort of make. So why not just
Hmm.
say, too bad?
Yeah, no, and I think that is a response. I don't know if it's the right response. So to kind of maybe flesh out the full trilemma. So the first option is it forces performers to come out before they're ready or before they want to. And that looks like it inflicts a moral wrong or harm onto somebody insofar as you're revealing information that they don't want you to reveal, and it's a deeply personal part of who you are. The second is it seems that it would require then it would implicitly out people against their role, and it's also not obvious that it would necessarily lead to more performers taking on characters, because insofar as um, the number of performers are then going to correspond to the number of characters, it looks like you'd already have a pretty tight list of people who would be able to permissibly portray those characters. But it would
You
also
saying
limit
that?
their, oh, good.
Are you saying that because the percentage of gay folks to straight folks is pretty like 2 or 3% of the population, and then you have to figure the people in Hollywood that would be actors would be an even smaller pool? Is it something like that? And you're just
Yeah, that if we already sort of have, say, 10 established performers who are taking on these roles, the number of queer characters who could then correspond to that's already going to be more or less filled. So it's going to kind of bottleneck in that regard. But there's also going to be a concern about future career prospects. Because if you're only going to be able to permissibly play these queer characters, your range will be, I think, a little bit more limited. So I think companies or directors would be more likely to cast from that small pool rather than, say, casting someone who is bi for a straight part.
actually, I forget if you addressed this in the paper because I
Mhm.
read it a while ago. But do is it one way? So is it seen as bad for like a gay character to portray a straight character, or is there sort of an asymmetry to it?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the other things that was sort of curious about it is there isn't this call for like matching across the board. It seems to only be for a dominant group against the marginalized group. And so one of the things that we think people are sort of like rightly picking up on is these character representations matter. But we think that they're kind of sort of missing the mark by saying, well, then it's got to be the performer that does it. And so I think,
Which I think is a great place to make your distinction, which you two make in the paper between character
mhm,
authenticity and performer authenticity. What does that
mhm.
mean, and what's the difference?
Yeah, so no, thank you. So the distinction is something has character authenticity when it accurately depicts what the real world corresponding experiences would plausibly be like. And then performer authenticity is when the performer's social identity corresponds to whatever the character authenticity would be. And I think there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that the character authenticity really matters. So if you look at, say, the history of queer cinema, early industry standards sort of prohibited or precluded film studios from producing sympathetic or multi-dimensional queer characters. So you saw a lot of sort of stereotypes of very effeminate men or very masculine women. And then as the industry regulations slightly changed, you saw more direct characters, but they were usually going to be social misfits or outsiders, serial killers, criminals, sexual predators, the whole kind of panoply. And it's not really until the like 80s and 90s and especially early 2000s that you start to see these more realistic and like gay positive characters. So you see like Will and Grace, Ellen, Dawson's Creek, Milk, Brokeback Mountain, and that's largely sort of credited with tipping public perceptions in favor, right? You could actually start seeing these three-dimensional characters that weren't just in it for one episode and it was like the coming out episode just to teach the straight characters a lesson about like maybe you shouldn't be mean to gay people. And then it was like promptly forgotten at the end of the episode and never mentioned again.
Yeah,
Um,
the sitcom reset, right?
yeah. um, but once you
So
had like, oh, go
what you
ahead.
seem to be saying, the Zoom thing has got a bit of a lag. I apologize. What you seem to be
Yeah.
saying is it what matters more vis-a-vis representation as how characters are portrayed than
Hmm.
per se who's doing the portrayal. So if you had
Yeah.
a straight, like I'm thinking of one of my favorite sitcoms, Frasier, and
Yeah.
I love Niles, who is
Yeah.
gay as an actor, but who
Hmm.
plays um, a straight man who's very interested in Daphne, one of the other main characters.
Yeah.
And I think he does a great job with it. I think it's really funny. Um,
Hmm.
but I'm not sure he captures the straight experience. So my
Yeah.
objection isn't that he's gay. It's that there's some
Yeah.
things about it. I see what they're going for. There's a lot of
Hmm.
stereotypes. It's
Hmm.
more the performance or
Yeah.
not the performance, the character.
Hmm.
But is that am I getting that right?
Yeah. I think that because for a long time there really weren't those sympathetic or deeper character representations for queer characters, you only really had the stereotypes to kind of fill the collective imagination. Um, and when you start seeing those longer story arc develops, so you see the same character deal with multiple issues over multiple seasons. That's when you kind of start recognizing, or you see the public attitudes changing, to be more sympathetic, to imagine the idea. Well, coming out isn't just like that one fateful episode. It's going to be more of a process. You have to keep on coming out, not just to your family and to your high school, but to your college, to your work, to the place you move to after college, to that job, right? And then, like, as you grow up, there's going to be other concerns that start showing up. So when you go for insurance questions, if it's always going to be exclusively a heterosexual marriage presumption about how you do benefits, right? So all of a sudden, I think these more involved and intricate storylines that emphasize what we call character authenticity bring these issues to national or like media attention that people probably maybe weren't thinking about because you were only exposed to those truncated like tropes, like the sassy gay man, the very mannish lesbian. And so I think once you kind of have the more robust character authenticity, that's really what does the important work for what people are really kind of interested in.
So at this point, couldn't a critic step in and say,
Hmm.
"Yeah, I get what you're saying. What you're saying is Will and Grace could have been portrayed by four straight characters.
Hmm.
And as far as representation is concerned, that is not really relevant, given that they do a very good job on screen of portraying lived experience of like your typical gay Manhattanite. I think it's in Manhattan,
Yeah.
wherever it takes
Yeah.
place. Um, and that's really what's doing the work of representation. But I can imagine a critic coming along and saying, "Yeah, I mean, that distinction makes sense. There's something there logically, but in the real world, aren't
Hmm.
performers who have the relevant lived experience going to be much better placed to portray that character
Hmm.
authenticity?"
Yeah. And I think that's one of the more popular or prominent lines of concerns that people raise. And I think it sounds intuitive, but I don't know if it actually hits its mark in a couple of um, really substantive issues. So the one example that we talk about in the paper is the story of Ryan White. So Ryan White was an 11-year-old, 12-year-old boy who contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. He was a hemophiliac. He became this kind of poster child for AIDS education throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, or 1990. But they made a movie for him, and White was in the movie, but he only played a background character because he didn't feel comfortable as an actor portraying himself. So if you read his autobiography, he explicitly talks about like, that's just not me. But he was on the set educating the actor, I think Lucas Haas, who plays him, who plays character Ryan White, and sort of helps coach him through like, this is what it was like when the town turned on me. You know, this is how frustrated and embarrassed I was when people called up the local radio show to say my mother was a bad mother. Um, and it seems like even though Ryan White would be the authority on Ryan White, acting and portraying, is a very different skill set. So I don't know if that's going to necessarily map out here where
So
it
it
should.
sounds like what you're saying is having the knowledge isn't necessarily the same thing. The lived
Hmm.
experience isn't the same thing as having the skill to convey the lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it. Hmm.
Yeah. But doesn't that go back to what I said earlier, though, which is
Hmm.
you're once again give me an example where this distinction comes apart, but aren't there going to be like real world in the real world, isn't it going to be the case that it's still better to start with a performer and then for performer authenticity and then head to the character authenticity? I can't let this
Uh,
go.
yeah. I mean, it might, but I think one of the concerns that'll also show up will be sort of an intersectional worry. So suppose, for instance, the example we talk about is Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart. So HBO made like a movie version. I think Netflix ended up picking it up. So one would be how intersectional are you going to make this? So you'd have gay men who are also HIV positive and also lived through the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s. By sheer demographic fact, that's going to be a very limited set, insofar as the people who were, say, in their 40s or 30s during that time might start aging out of the acting profession. So if you're only looking for people who would have been in their 20s or 30s, say, during the 80s, already you have a very narrow slice. And if they have to be gay, that's going to make it even narrower. And if they have to be HIV positive. Now you might say, well, look, that's just something. Well, why can't somebody from today who's also HIV positive and gay play that role? Well, the fact of the matter is the way that people conceptualize HIV has changed significantly. So up until the early mid 90s, it was largely seen as a death sentence because we didn't have a ton of medication for it. And even AZT wasn't great, it was something. But now with PrEP, it's much more an heart. It's much more like a chronic condition. So it radically changes how you're going to conceive of what does it mean to contract HIV. So I think one, if we do take that point to say you have to start with performer authenticity and then build to character authenticity, there's going to be a number of historical roles that are just closed off forever. And two, the more intersectional we make the representation, the less likely we're ever going to kind of get that performer authenticity match.
Yeah, maybe a way to put it is like the more you narrow the intersectional calculus, the smaller the
Hmm.
pool of talent. That's just
Yeah.
yeah, that's just like set theory or that's really with
Hmm.
anything. I mean, another one
Hmm.
might just be um not like taking the role but not outing yourself.
Yeah.
And just I mean the problem with that is you have the backlash, right? So
Yeah.
you have to deal with that. But you also have people wondering too, like, what is your relationship as a person to the role you're playing? That's going to be a question.
Hmm.
How does that, like, how good of a job did you do of portraying that lived experience?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I'm doing your work for you, but you can imagine that one of
Yeah.
the options would just be like, yeah, we just gay or straight people take the role and they just don't come out. They just don't say what their
Yeah.
sexual preferences or their sexual orientation or whatever is. Um,
Hmm.
why is that bad?
Yeah. So that I think takes us to, I think it was the second horn of the trilemma was it seems likely fans are going to badger and protest. And I think if they don't get an answer, there might be like then either people like, well, you shouldn't watch this because you're sort of contributing to this social bad thing. That's a super technical term. But um, I think it's going to then kind of have those negative effects on the industry because producers are going to be less likely to look out for roles that would hire this performer who is kind of courting controversy with it because it's going to be a riskier bet than not. So if you have two performers who are relatively same in terms of acting ability, one has already finished a show that was protested because the performer was accused of taking a lesbian role from a lesbian performer, and you have another one who's similar acting ability but doesn't have that baggage. I think the studios would be far more likely to take the person who doesn't have that baggage because then you're not risking any of it, right? That's just the
Right,
safer market bet.
right. Well, I mean, you might get some weird counterculture nonsense where
Hmm.
the gays are taking over or some nonsense. Um, you might get that, but I take your point. Um,
Hmm.
but I wonder if it, like say, look, if you're really going to represent, this is something I find mystifying, like taking away a
Yeah.
role as if it's
Yeah.
yours just in virtue of being gay. It's like comments. My wife and I rewatched West Wing,
Yeah.
and sometimes they'll make comments about like they're taking our voters, as an election
Hmm.
is pending, and I
Yeah.
always think you have to earn it. You have to earn an
Yeah.
audience. You have to earn a
Hmm.
vote.
Yeah.
You have to earn a place at a college if you want to be a professor. Like these are all things that you have to
Hmm.
earn. I find that's sort of a funny way to put it, but I hear it a lot. Taking
Yeah.
away a role from taking. Um, but I wonder if you're really concerned with representation, and there's value to representation. I recognize that. Maybe a better approach might be looking for versatility,
Hmm.
meaning an actor who can play roles very diverse from each other
Hmm.
convincingly. And the
Yeah.
reason I say that is because if you have someone who's very versatile, Kevin Spacey comes to mind, Anthony Hopkins, there's a number of them.
Hmm.
Denzel Washington's another one. Denzel Washington, the first time I mean, just as an example, I
Hmm.
saw Training Day. It was my first
Yeah.
Denzel Washington movie. He scared the
Hmm.
shit out of me. Very, very convincing role. Not
Yeah.
recognizing how odd that role was for him in the
Hmm.
grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And then, sort of watching his other movies and just being like, wow, he's got such range. If anybody could
Hmm.
portray fill in the blank, presumably you'd want
Yeah.
someone with range. And then you
Yeah.
could have, like on set, you could have producers or
Hmm.
consultants or whatever to sort of bridge that lived experience part. Why
Yeah.
isn't that just a better solution?
Hmm.
It
No,
just happens to be
I
your
think,
solution, but yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and we do try to emphasize that in the paper that you you have an epistemic obligation to learn about what these character authenticity aspects would be, and the easiest way to do that is to bring in members from the marginalized groups and people who maybe aren't going to be good or comfortable with acting themselves would still be able to then incorporate their stories or the lived experiences into it. And a lot of, I think, actors already do this. So it's not like an additional thing you must do.
Right.
I think if
I'm
you
gonna
don't want to
say
be a
just
hack, right?
right, like a lot of character actors, whatever, whether
Hmm.
the role is a marginalized group or like a bank robber from the
Yeah.
1880s or whatever it is, you want to like learn the culture, learn the history, like really get into the head. I think those are the best
Hmm.
actors. So I think really I
Yeah.
think maybe we're just talking about like is it method acting? Is that the term, method acting?
Yeah. But you totally
You
go into
know,
the framework and yeah.
yeah, exactly. But get in that headspace. Like if I were a gay man in this
Hmm.
situation, try and internalize as much of that as possible. So you get to
Hmm.
feel what it's like on the inside.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of good actors really do this,
Hmm.
or the ones that I like,
Yeah. And it's not uncommon. I know, for instance, in Love, Simon, I'm blanking on the actor's name, but he wasn't gay, but I think his cousin was, and he sat down and talked with his cousin extensively of like, well, what was it actually like to come out? Not just the coming out itself, but what was your life like before? How did you have to navigate the world with these kinds of what do you watch, what you say? How do you like police your gait, the way you walk, the way you talk, what you bring up, what you don't bring up? Um, so I think those are already, as to your point, people are already doing that to try and make sure that their performance is as convincing as possible. And it does help, I think, to your earlier comment, expand their range and versatility, not just like, hey, I played this role once, but I really have a good grip on what these set of experiences are like.
Yeah. The other part of the last part of the trilemma was just forgo taking a role they want and would excel at. So if you're an
Hmm.
actor who's gay and you if you feel like, oh, in order to take this part, I have to be outed, or I'm straight and I can't take this role because I'm straight and the character is gay,
Hmm.
people lose out on opportunities. But I
Hmm.
kind of feel like isn't that just Hollywood? I mean, missing out on opportunities is like, I mean, you have the John
Hmm.
Hamm. Is it John Hamm? One of the major actors who like he was like a month away from quitting. He was a waiter and he just
Hmm.
was about to quit. He got his breakthrough. But
Yeah.
there's like 20 or 30 other people like him or her who like were never close. They weren't going to get it. They don't. They're screwed. They maybe get a
Hmm.
few bit parts here and there and then wash out. It's kind of like academia
Yeah.
actually in that regard. But I mean, yeah, it's tragic, but isn't that just I mean, it seems
Hmm.
to be baseline for Hollywood in particular,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Why can't someone
Yeah,
just
no,
say, well, too bad, so sad?
insofar, so I think so the first concerns was you'd be outed before you're ready. You could take the role without coming out, and then you're going to be basically kind of forced into it, or it would narrow the repertoire and force people to come out. And so I think if the goal is to maximize the number of performers, that looks like it's going to kind of interfere with that, increasing the pool of eligible performers. Um, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what the concern
I'm
itself
getting
is.
like, okay, so if you, I'm taking the third horn of your trilemma, the forego
Yeah.
taking a role they want should excel at.
Mm,
Meaning if you can only take a role that matches if the character has to match the actor
mm,
in the right ways with the right characteristics,
yeah.
um, then you might just think, well, if I don't want to get out of it, then I just have to forego the role. Or if I'm
Yeah.
straight and I just don't match, then I just don't get it. To which I would
Mm,
say, I'm not so sure that's a harm. Like of the three, that seems the least bad, given
mm,
Hollywood. If we were talking about state work or some very banal sort of employment, I think that'd be much more stinging. But given how unlikely you are
yeah.
to make it anyway, it's Hollywood. Aren't
Yeah.
you kind of a little
Mm.
crazy to be even in this industry to begin with? I mean,
No,
it's like I
so
said,
I
like
think
it's
that's a
like
fair,
academia. It's very hard to get a
yeah.
job.
No, I think that's fair. It's going to be a long shot regardless. And so I think one of the things we're trying to do in the trilemma is to say, look, overly interested busybody fan, if you really are concerned about increasing the number of queer performers, this looks like it's going to be counterproductive because you're shrinking that pool of eligible people. So I think in terms of like the long run, it's not going to be getting you what you want anyway. And then from there, we try to set it up of, well, maybe I think this goes back to one of your earlier questions. Why isn't this just the cost of doing the right thing? Um, and so we try to say, well, look, here are four other concerns we have that people sometimes cite to say this is the greater good that we're aiming at. And each of these are also not really going to pan out. Um, mhm.
Yeah, I think the point here is there's a often people will confuse could do something with would do something. They're not the same thing
Yeah.
at all.
Mm,
Like because someone has lived experience doesn't mean they're going to be able to convey it. Those are not people
yeah.
run those together and they're not the same thing. You can have a lot of stuff in your head,
Yeah.
like someone who's on the spectrum, like autistic or they're a little ADHD, they may have a hard time expressing a
Mhm.
very rich mental life.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't come out.
Hmm.
Um, I also wanted to ask you, so I was reading this and I thought, why is it
Hmm.
that people get so upset? I'm offended. Not really, but I'm a little offended
Yeah.
about like just particular race and gender. Now, it's
Hmm.
not that those are not relevant categories or important categories,
Hmm.
but I don't hear the outrage as much, nearly as much, when it comes to things like being obese.
Hmm.
Now, I'm about 6'3.5".
Hmm.
I've been obese for large parts of my life. At a point, I was over 600 pounds.
Yeah.
Like I'm a large dude, and
Hmm.
there are a lot of struggles that you deal with when you are in a larger body, if you want to put it that way.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I recognize statistically, I'm very strange. I'm in a very small subset of the population. There's not a lot of people who are
Hmm.
like male and 6'4". So I recognize the world wasn't designed for me, but it also isn't portrayed very well in Hollywood. Now,
Hmm.
I'm not saying there's not value to this. There is, and it would be nice for people to understand a little bit more what it's like, because there's parts of it that suck.
Yeah.
But I guess I've kind of just made my peace with it.
Hmm.
At the same time, why the focus on those particular? And you could say something like, well, historically, gay folks or black folks or queer folks or however you want, the different groups, marginalized groups have been discriminated against and whatnot. But people with like body disfigurations or oddities, I would consider
Hmm.
obese kind of in that category. Same goes.
Yeah.
So, like, is it too, what I'm asking, I guess, in a very long-winded way, is it too narrow to just focus on race and sexual
Hmm.
orientation?
No, I mean, I think you have your finger on a really important part of the discussion, and I do think we're starting to see similar kinds of questions and demands from sort of online fans. So I'm thinking of Brendan Fraser in his most recent movie, or not the most recent movie. I'm blanking on it. And I feel very foolish.
How about The Whale?
Yes, The Whale, um,
It's not a movie,
where
by
I
the
think
way.
he
I
started.
highly recommend.
Yeah. So no, yeah, so I've heard really wonderful things about it. But I do remember seeing some questions about representation for obesity. So I think we're going to start seeing those same kinds of questions as a kind of not sprawl, but um, sort of touching on the same kind of inner logic that you were bringing up of, well, why not also do this? So I think we haven't seen it historically, but I do think we're going to start see it. This is just a prediction on my part, but I do think we're going to start seeing it becoming more common to ask these questions. And I think one of the things we try to do towards, oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think one of the things we try to do in the end of the paper is to say, look, obviously these other conversations about representation are super important, but it would be a mistake to try and just do like a copy paste of what we do for queer sexuality and sexual orientation to then say, oh, this is going to automatically be the exact same result with blackface or the exact same result with obesity or the exact same result with anything. So we also take up the issue of Gentiles playing Jewish characters towards the end to say, look, this is a very different, it's the similarities, but there's a very different kind of structure because the histories of these groups are very different. And so insofar as there are similarities, we obviously think our account will generalize to there. But insofar as there's going to be differences among these sort of shared histories, uh, I don't think there's going to be a neat copy like, oh, this is what you conclude here for group A. So naturally, we can just use that as a springboard for group B. To some extent, yes, we try to introduce the mutatis mutandis condition. Um,
This is one of the reasons I avoided race because I didn't really want to talk about that one. Like awkward.
yeah,
Um, and that's why I used obesity. So I was trying to ask questions from what I might imagine left-wing critics was asked, but I have a couple from the right.
sure.
And I don't know, it's kind of hard to ask questions for other people, but I'm trying to imagine. So two of them. So one of them would be, look, why can't the the sorts of groups and identity we focus on in the mainstream culture seems a little slanted. So
Hmm.
why don't we have more conservative Christians?
Hmm.
Um, Women who regret abortions. I'm trying to think of like
Hmm.
groups that don't, people on the spectrum.
Hmm.
Um, Sort of groups that get mocked inside. Like if you're a conservative Christian, I'm not one of them, but if you were,
Yeah,
you get a lot of crap. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, that was different. And I'm only saying
yeah,
that because there are a lot of Christians in this
sure.
country still.
Hmm.
And we seem to focus on things that are now you could say something like it's immutable. There's a difference between like an immutable characteristic like race or gender and something like religious belief.
Hmm.
But I'm not so sure that's right. Like once you
Yeah,
believe a religion, it's kind of hard to back out of it. And I'm
yeah,
talking someone who sincerely believes, like they
yeah.
are a sincere, whether it's Judaism, Islam, Christianity, but a sincere religious person. Another
Hmm.
example might be a conservative, political conservative at a university or a government
Yeah,
institution, but that isn't
yeah,
portrayed in a way that's cartoonish. Like I love Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec. He's
yeah,
hilarious, but it's
yeah,
not really fair. That's not really what libertarians think. I have friends that are libertarians, like they laugh, but that's not really right.
yeah.
And so, in other words, there seems to be sort of a slant to the identity groups that we focus on.
Hmm.
I mean, there's explanations why, but do
Of
you
course.
think that pantheon of like identity groups should be expanded
Hmm.
even in ways that like mainstream culture might not like or just doesn't notice?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. So one of the first examples that came to my mind was circling back to your earlier comment about rewatching West Wing. And so for a few episodes, they had Ainsley on,
It's
right?
like,
And
hey,
she was, yeah, she was very, she was like, she was jokey, right? But she was very smart. She was very sharp. And sitcoms are set up so you know who you're laughing with and who you're laughing at, right? And so for a number of exchanges, right, she gets the better of Sam. she defends a lot of conservative positions that aren't just this kind of, as to your point, like cartoonish, like, well, that's just what I believe kind of a thing. You do see a very smart presentation. Unfortunately, she doesn't last that long, but I think she would have been a very good voice. And then even still at the end of West Wing, when Alan Alda plays the other senator, I don't remember his
Earl
name.
Vinnick. Let's go,
Yes.
Arnie. Let's go, Arnie. Which, by the
Yeah.
way, Arnie, I would have voted for Arnie over Santos. Just saying. I like
Mhm.
Alan Alda more than Jimmy Smits.
Oh yeah,
Just
Alan
a,
Alda, he's hysterical in MASH. I loved it. But again, like you see a very smart, like there's even the one scene when he's doing the debate with Santos of like, and I suppose your answer is going to be tax cuts for whatever it was. And he's like, yes, yes, it is. And then he fires off this, and here's why, right? So like, and it goes through because it's not the kind of cartoonish one. So, I mean, I do think you're right that a lot of these other concerns about how we accurately represent these groups don't come to light. And I think maybe we should start rewriting characters. And I think in a lot of ways it does contribute to um, sort of pigeonholing. So here, for instance, I'm thinking about the way religion does get represented, not just in media in general, but in terms of how does it get represented vis-a-vis coming out. So, in a very common thread in the coming out stories that we see on sitcoms and movies was you have the like super fundamentalist, closed-minded religious person who then gets like comes down really hard and mean on the person who comes out, and then there's like the crowd turns against the fundamentalist person, and they're shown to see this buffoon. And I think that does contribute to this idea, right, that being religious is sort of equivalent with like buffoonery, or like you're too stuck in the past or too judgmental. Um, but there's a couple of shows where you don't see that same dynamic, and I think they do it in a very good way. So, like in Dawson's Creek, when Jack comes out, his grandmother is deeply religious. And in the one episode when Jen and her at the time boyfriend are talking about Jack, the boyfriend's like making fun of Jack. It's not natural. He's not doing what's moral. And the grandmother tries to interject, and Jen says, like, no, no, I'm not going to let you holy roller me into this. And the grandmother says, like, no, like, Jennifer, I've had quite enough of you. Like, Jack needs understanding. He needs patience. He needs to know that he's loved. And that's like what we're supposed to do as Christians. And that voice doesn't always come out, right? Or I'm thinking also of Julian in The Shield. So it was this like 7 season cop show, sort of this film noir, fantastic if you haven't seen it.
excellent,
Uh,
excellent show.
yeah. Oh my
Yes.
God. Yeah.
Michael
Wonderful.
Chiklis. I'm trying to think of who else.
Yes.
Walton
Hmm.
Goggins.
Yeah.
On and on and on. Yes. Great show.
Like fun. But so Julian is a fundamentalist Christian, right? And he struggles with his bisexuality. And we don't really, and if the storyline gets dropped a little bit later as the show progresses, but we don't see those kinds of things where the typical one is the person who's gay and religious leaves their faith, right? Because there's just no space for it, that the religions don't make a space for it. But I think Julian's is someone who's grappling with it, and he's sort of penned into this idea of the only way forward with religion is conversion therapy, right? And I think at least it shows this kind of struggle that, like, look, if we don't find a way forward, you're kind of stuck in Julian's position, right? If we don't open up these religious dialogues with people to show what would that look like? What would it look like to be more like Jen's grandmother than sort of Julian's pastor?
Yeah, Julian's pastor. Which was
Mm.
did Julian no favors.
Yeah.
From what I remember, I don't think it ends well for Julian, unfortunately.
Mm.
Yeah. The other critique would be, I think, from the right.
Hmm.
I mean, broadly right.
Yeah,
I'm
no, I know what
grouping
you mean.
people in. I'm grouping people in ironically because I'm about to. So you might worry. Look, if the goal is we want to give ordinary folks when they turn on their television a glimpse into the lives of gay folks in
Hmm.
such a way that represents them at least fairly accurately. You're never going to be perfectly accurate because we're talking about
Sure.
individuals, and in a
Mm.
way that helps people outside of that community understand what it's like. Okay,
Hmm.
those are noble goals.
Hmm.
But a conservative or someone on the right might come back and say, that's true, but what you're going to do is undercut your mission, theoretically. And you're already seeing this with
Hmm.
Hollywood. Meaning, if no one's watching your show, not nobody, but if you've lost a huge
Yeah.
percentage of your audience because you come across as political, because you're trying to engage in representation, aren't you
Hmm.
cutting off your nose to spite your face? And
Yeah.
this is a PR point. I'll grant you,
Hmm.
but it's a PR point that's like, here's the PR choke point between our efforts on the one hand and acceptance on the other.
Yeah. No, I think that's a super I think it's a super sharp critique. And the thing that sort of reminds me of is towards the end of the Celluloid Closet, Vito Russo, he's a gay film critic, sort of writes this kind of like watershed book on it. And he says if you try to write the gay American novel or the gay American movie, he said it's gonna probably fall flat, um, because you're trying to do something that's being super political without reflecting genuineness. So he says the really successful thing to do is to just write a great story where the characters happen to be lesbian or they happen to be gay. And I think we actually do see this in something like Brokeback Mountain. Like, I think it was, yes, a gay love story, but I think it was a love story first and foremost. And the characters sort of happened to be gay. Um, and it had depth, it had range. If anything, it doesn't really do the coming out at all. And granted, that might be a historical product, but neither of the characters tell their families, right? And it's this question of like, well, how do you stay in a marriage that you're not really committed to while also being with this person who you love? And then how do you grieve them without openly grieving them, right? Because
Well,
there's
yeah,
no,
it's like being partly in a totalitarian society or something where you can't. It's got like a 1984 feel. I
yeah.
feel my takeaway from that was you guys are kind of shitty husbands though. Like
They
it's not really
are,
the gay thing for me so much as the cheating or the just.
yeah,
And I get that they're in a difficult position, so it's not just you're being straight up and disingenuous. I understand that it's more nuanced than that. But I
yeah.
take your point, and I'm not saying you can't do gay stories or lesbian stories or BIPOC stories or
Hmm.
whatever. I just worry. It's sort of like, is it the Stoics that will tell you if you go looking for happiness, it's the last thing you're going to find because it's
Yeah.
too pointed, it's too direct. So it's not
Hmm.
like maybe the best way to do representation is not to head at it directly and then
Yeah.
come off as political or preachy, which I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
being preached at in any capacity is just a turn
Sure.
off for me personally. And I
Yeah.
suspect a lot of people feel that way. So I don't know. I think there's something to the rights critique, but I think they go too far too, the other way,
Yeah.
where it's like, can we just completely erase all of this stuff from
Yeah.
popular culture? And I think there's a middle ground, which is I think this is the beauty of a liberal democracy where you can have if you want that sort of thing, it's available, but there's also all
Hmm.
these other thriving projects.
Yeah.
Let 1,000 aesthetic flowers bloom, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. And I mean, I think, in the past, I'm thinking of specific examples where people set out to write like the gay story and it flops. So like there's a really early show called Normal Ohio. It has John Goodman. And so the premise was you had John Goodman comes out as gay, he's married, he has a wife, or he had a wife and a son, and he moves out to Hollywood for a while. And then comes back to be with his family. And the idea was John Goodman doesn't fit the like stereotypical idea of like the ripped abs gay person or like the effete metrosexual or something like that. He was just this normal Ohio. So it doesn't take place in New York City or LA or San Francisco. It's, I grew up in Cleveland, right? It was very much like this is just kind of it. Um, and they set out to tell that story, but it didn't really have any depth. Like there was no motivation. It wasn't like, well, okay, as a gay dad, like how do you date somebody and then introduce them to your son? Or like what's the relationship with your ex-wife? Or, look, as a gay parent, and this is back, I think, in the 90s, so it wasn't like even recent. But like, what's the relationship then to your parents as an adult gay person who's coming back into their life after you've stepped out for a while? Um, so it had the opportunity to raise all of these really great questions, but it tried to sort of turn everything into a punchline or just didn't deal with it at all. Um, and so like I think it set out to do that and it had this chance, but it veered much more into the political or the failed territory rather than this could have been something awesome. It just didn't live up to that
Sort of,
potential.
yeah, it sort of reminds me of like, you're an academic and you want to get published. So then you go, okay, I'm going to try and write something publishable. Now I have to think of an idea. And you're like,
Yeah,
okay, so that's not the right way to go about it. Because there's
sure.
no passion, there's no inspiration behind it. Like,
Yeah.
why care? Just to get a line
Hmm.
on your CV? You know,
Hmm.
like if that's the only thing we're doing. But it's better, I think, if you're like, no, I want to pursue passion.
Yeah.
And then these other things can naturally fall to that. I think that's better. Um, because it feels forced otherwise. And I think there's good ways to do it. But I also think this ties into a much broader topic.
Sure.
It's something that I complain about to my wife a lot, that like sitcoms cannot write wives. Like from like
Hmm.
1990 to like 2020. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is about writers' rooms. They're
Hmm.
wives and like female spouse types, like um, boss women, like women, like strong women. There's some good examples of
Hmm.
like strong women who don't come off as like mentally ill or toxic or something. And this is a writer's room
Yeah.
problem. This is not a woman problem. Like the way they're being represented is like
Hmm.
that's just not a thing. But in any case, and I
Yeah.
realized like part of it is like for the joke. It's to set up a joke.
Hmm.
Well, that's part of it. But I wonder if you're getting your cultural and moral education from television primarily,
Yeah.
and you're not in on the joke. Like this is not
Hmm.
a role model. He or she, whoever's doing this, we're making them
Hmm.
do this because it's funny or we think it's funny.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if we haven't thought enough about this. Like we just sort of put shows on, and I get what you're saying. There's always like the moral exemplar or like whoever it is in the scene that's supposed to be like the conscience of this. But a lot of
Yeah.
times they're written by writers who are just morally idiots. Or they haven't thought it through,
Yeah.
or it's like they just phoned it in because it's a super generic show.
Hmm.
It just doesn't, and it's unfortunate because I wonder if it's because they're mostly males and they just write these really toxic women type these
Yeah.
characters. You see, there's plenty of other examples of it, but like my favorite go-to case is Everybody Loves Raymond,
Yeah.
which is not to say that like Raymond is like everyone, like Raymond's got problems, but I think you kind of know that going in. I thought that's the joke.
Yeah.
And then as the show goes on, Deborah gets increasingly hostile, is the word I'd use. Like
Hmm.
this is not good behavior for a healthy marriage. And I
Yeah.
think people are watching this and they're not in on the joke, maybe.
Hmm.
Or maybe they're consciously on the joke, but
Yeah.
subconsciously they absorb. So
Hmm.
what I'm getting at in a very long-winded way, and I'll blame the fact that I'm old, is that I wonder if we haven't thought enough about the ethics of television and movies. I think
Hmm.
your and Travis's paper fits in that nicely in that.
Hmm.
But have you thought about this paper in regards to anything much broader?
Um, I don't know in terms of other products, but I know from some of the other things I've read and Travis and I have talked about, um, sometimes shows, I think, they do the kind of Mickey Mouse morality of like, well, if you just told me the truth, I wouldn't be upset. And it's like, well, that's clearly not true, right? You would be very mad if I told you the truth. Um, but oftentimes, I think one of the things that makes some shows very attractive is they do sell that kind of fantasy, not the morally innocent fantasy, but so like there's a study about women characters who went to work in the 1980s and some of the lines that like were incorporated into these shows and then when the shows were offered, so what time slot, what day, is it a family show? And so, like, some of the lines that are used are meant to feed into that aspiration. So, for instance, like, mom comes home and very tired, and then the kids say, you know what? Why don't we cook for you for a change? You do so much for us, and we'll clean the house too. And I think it feeds into that, like, yes, my family's going to be super supportive. They're going to get it. And it turns out like that just doesn't happen, right? The second shift is still like a pretty consistent factor, right? That maybe once in a blue moon you get that like on Mother's Day, the you know what, mom, like let us do this for you. And it's I think part of that secret fantasy is like the teenagers are finally gonna get that like your parents are doing everything for you, and like maybe you'll have that one moment. Um, Speaking as a former teenager, right? I never had that moment. Looking back, I'm like, wow, I was kind of a jerk. But
Oh no,
like
yeah.
that
No, I
kind
was
of moment where,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, I was a
mhm,
total asshole. Yeah. Like I didn't realize it at the time. I
yeah,
didn't set out to be. But yeah, no, I hear you.
mhm,
No, I get that. And I get like there's a lot of marketing and aspirations. There's a lot of stuff. And I'm not trying to poke or point at anybody.
yeah,
I think it's a writer's room
Yeah.
problem, and it's just like part of it's just being sloppy. But I don't. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is, I don't know that your median citizen gets it. I don't know if they've even
Hmm.
consciously thought about it. That like don't
Yeah.
internalize this stuff. It's like this. It's kind of like when you used to go to shows or something, and they'd be like, "This is not. Don't try this at home, boys and girls. You hurt yourself. This is for professionals only. Like, do not internalize this stuff. My goodness,
Yeah.
and do not look to these people as role models. They are not.
Hmm. Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is like part of this. I wonder is how much of this worry about representation is because culturally we've forfeited so many other things, church and
Hmm.
schools and bigger families and like more involved social activities, and now everyone sits on their screens. So your moral education comes from like movies and TV shows. So God dang it, it better be representative.
Yeah. No, I think that might be a legit concern where the representation, especially if it's a group you're not familiar with, right? You're more likely to say, this is what it is. So I know, like Patricia Hill Collins talks about controlling images. And so the idea is if you're not familiar with the group and you see a member of the group now cinematically or artistically enacting the stereotype, that's very different than someone who's not a member of the group telling you the stereotype in authority, because the controlling image is now self-citing evidence, right? I've seen members of the group do X because, look, I've watched that movie. I know, right? Um, like I of course I know gay people are into like promiscuous fast lane sex because I saw Al Pacino in Cruising. And you're like, well, I don't know how representative that is, right? Um, but I think
It's
you're right
like
that if you,
I wouldn't say Two and a Half Men is a great representation of like the swinging the Bachelor, the straight
yeah,
bachelor. Like Charlie
yeah,
Harper is not. I mean, it's I love the show. It's like a guilty pleasure show, but
hmm
God, he's toxic. Don't be like Charlie Harper.
sure, right? But I think you also had a lot of people watching things like How I Met Your Mother or Friends and thinking like, when I move out, like this is what my early 20s and 30s are going to be like, and it just was not. But that's the fantasy that they sold. And I think a lot of people wanted it to be there. Um,
Yeah, I think you're in Travis. This paper is great and that it's a bigger. I think it's a bigger problem. Like there's people who just aren't in on the joke.
yeah.
Like this is not. This is
Hmm.
for entertainment only. It's like junk.
Yeah.
It's junk food in a sense, but
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah, I think so. I think we part of the great thing about open society is you get lots of creative diversity and expression. But one of the downsides is you don't have a concerted effort to inform people. Like
Hmm.
this is for entertainment only. Do not try
Yeah.
this at home. This is not like
Mm.
you get this with legal stuff too. My wife's a prosecutor. People think they're entitled to a phone call, and it's like it's not that simple. But in every TV show, whenever you're arrested, you get that
Yeah.
call. I
I've
want
seen
my
that Law
phone
and
call.
Order. I know.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen it. I know it's in my right. It's not.
Yeah.
It's more nuanced than that, as it turns
Mm.
out.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it's part of a larger
Yeah.
project
Mm.
of there's like a
Yeah.
representation media ethics thing here. But hey guys, I'll put a link to the paper in the show notes, and I
Yeah.
thought it was a
Let me
very
know.
good paper.
Well,
I really
thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you for reading it and for having me on here. And it's been great chatting.
So Kurt, is there if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
So I have a website. So it's kurtblankschaen.com. And so it's also linked to my page at Daemen University. Yeah, I do a lot of like right now I have a paper I'm working on about marriage equality, HIV, AIDS, and moral innocence. Um, so I've also written on mass shooters and blood donation. So a wide range of all cheery topics, but
I'm gonna say lots of light
um,
topics,
I
but
know.
yeah.
So, but no, this has been really nice talking with you. And thank you again for reading the paper and for all your questions.
Yeah, Kurt, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Mhm.